Welcome to Accommodate This. My name is David, and I'm a late diagnosed autistic adult. I make content about autism and the neurodivergent experience, so if that's something you're interested in, please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future videos. I was diagnosed autistic at 44. Since then, I've tried my best to learn and understand what it means to be autistic. And little did I know at the time, but my lifetime of experience with extensive health issues, coordination issues, social issues, emotional issues, food and sensory issues, all could be attributed to having an autistic brain. And it wasn't all negative. I can still attribute all my talents and values and good qualities to autism as well. But in this video, I'm going to talk to you about the way that the human brain actually develops, touching on many of the ways autistic brain development differs from the typical brain development. And this video is not intended to provide an exhaustive list of autistic traits, nor is it about describing how autism is expressed in every autistic individual. We're all different, but we share similar experiences because of shared biology. And unfortunately, we are too often judged by what people see on the outside, not really understanding how deep our differences go. And unfortunately, too often, the assumption is that we can change those differences through learning or practice. But my hope is that the information in this video will foster more understanding and acceptance of the autistic community, cutting through much of the stigma associated with the condition. And with that in mind, let's get into the topic for this video, brain development. There's no question that autistic brains develop differently than neurotypical brains. But in what ways and how? While all neurotypes are as valid as the next, science shows a relationship between more pronounced structural brain differences and more severe autistic traits. Many of our traits are not learned behaviors or social deficits that we need to overcome. They are variations in our neurology, which drives our thoughts, experiences, and perceptions. I tried my best to include what I felt were the most notable developmental milestones and the most important differences in autistic brain development, but I'm not a medical expert, so please take this with a grain of salt. I recognize this is only a small piece of a bigger tapestry of the autistic expression. There's a ton of information and data out there about the biological differences in autistics, and we're learning more all the time. So I encourage you to do your own research. If you want to find out more, I will have the links to my sources in the description below. Let's start by describing the order of events in brain development. Our timeline begins with conception. The germinal period begins during the first couple of weeks of pregnancy after the egg is fertilized. This is when the zygote begins to form and early cell division occurs. By the end of the first 2 weeks, the zygote travels to the uterus where it is implanted. By week 3, the embryonic period begins, and the neural tube that will eventually become the brain and spinal cord begins to develop. The brain and spinal cord are also known collectively as the central nervous system. By the 6th week, neural production begins via a process known as differentiation. Basically, neural stem cells will convert into either neuronal progenitors or glial progenitors. Neuronal progenitors end up turning into neurons. Glial progenitors can turn into astrocytes, which provide nutrients and regulate the brain's chemical environment, or oligodendrocytes, which insulate the cell with myelin. As neurons are differentiated, they travel through the central nervous system to other areas of the body, building pathways along the way. Some neurons end up in nerves and sensory organs. These sensory regions outside of the brain and spinal cord are called the peripheral nervous system. The fetal period begins in week 9, and by week 28, the basic brain structure and pathways are established, forming the major compartments of the central and peripheral nervous systems. At this point, brain development ramps up. In autistics, there's a significant surplus of cells, making it difficult for the body to differentiate or absorb them all before birth. This allows for opportunities to develop more connections and structures in the nervous system, which we'll talk about later. After birth, cells continue to differentiate, and the brain continues to develop, ramping up development after 6 months, and doubling brain size by the end of the first year. The brain will increase even faster in autistics during the second year compared to typically developing brains. The period between 18 and 24 months is when the American Academy of Pediatrics, or AAP, recommends seeking an autism diagnosis. Brain development increases after age 2, quadrupling in size by age 4. Autistic brain volume will begin to decrease by age 5, which is when most children are diagnosed in the U.S. By the end of the 5th year, the developing brain has reached 90% of the adult volume. Any point after this is considered late for obtaining an autism diagnosis. Between ages 10 to 15, autistic brains begin shrinking and typical brain development increases to equal levels. Brain shrinkage has been associated with cognitive decline, learning difficulties, mood changes, and communication problems. This shrinkage typically begins in middle age for neurotypicals. Autistic brain shrinkage accelerates at age 17 and then tapers off in the mid-20s when full development is considered to have been reached. Differentiation stops at this point as well. Earlier I mentioned autistic brains have a surplus of brain cells during development. Let's take a moment to talk about the results from that. This is the temporal lobe, which is responsible for all sorts of processes, including language processing and sensory integration. If we were to track how information travels through this lobe, we could build a sort of map that looks similar to a subway map. This helps us to see the possible routes or pathways brain signals can take. The more direct the route, the easier it is to process that information. The more regions that information has to pass through, the longer it's going to take to process that information. So when we're talking about connections within a particular lobe, the more connections the better, because this allows the brain to process information quickly, taking shorter, more direct routes more often. This is why things become easier as you build habits, because your brain will literally build new connections and reinforce those pathways to allow for more optimal processing the next time. Autistic brains are known to have more connections within each lobe, which was possible because we had more cells building more connections and producing more pronounced pathways. The reality of this is that we have fast, immediate reactions because there are more pathways for signals to take. And our reactions are quite intense because the pathways are more pronounced, allowing for a stronger signal. This can lead to overstimulation, resulting in a meltdown. And while meltdowns appear to be overreactions on the outside, on the inside, the autistic brain is being flooded with signals, and there's no way for us to filter out that information as fast as it comes in. Now let's say we created maps for each of the lobes in the brain. More complex thought requires coordination between multiple lobes. However, with more connections between lobes, the longer the path and the slower the processing speed. Autistic brains have significantly more connections between lobes than neurotypicals, which requires more processing time, especially under stress. If there are too many signals being received from too many places at once, it can cause signals to cross or to interfere with one another, leading to overstimulation, understimulation, confusion, or even a continuous loop. Not fun. Now let's talk about specific brain differences, starting with the limbic system. The limbic system is the emotional nervous system. This group of brain structures is mostly found within the center of the brain and is responsible for many things. There are 4 main structures within this system. Let's take a look at each one. The hypothalamus produces hormones that help you sleep, manage your mood, hunger and thirst, sexual arousal, blood pressure, body temperature, and heart rate. While the overall volume of this region is often larger in autistics, the amount of gray matter is typically less, leading to a diminished production of hormones such as oxytocin, which is associated with social motivation, and arginine vasopressin, which regulates blood pressure, kidney function, and the body's water and salt balance. Together, these hormones reinforce the processes associated with empathy, eye contact, and facial memory. The hypothalamus also tends to generate symptoms associated with sickness, such as fever. The amygdala is involved in processing emotions, such as fear, anger, and anxiety, as well as memory and social interpretations, for instance, understanding other people's emotions. The amygdala tends to be larger in autistics, growing at an accelerated rate between 6 and 12 months of age. The faster the amygdala grows, the more severe autistic symptoms may be at 24 months. On average, the rate of anxiety in autistic children was reported at 69%, as opposed to only 8% in autistic children. And this carries forward into adulthood, where many autistic adults report suffering from chronic anxiety. Both the size and the volume impact anxiety. For example, individuals with traditional anxiety may have larger amygdala volumes, while individuals with autism-distinct anxieties tend to have lower amygdala volumes. Volumes of what, you might ask? Serotonin, the feel-good hormone, which affects many bodily functions, and low levels of serotonin are linked to depression and dysregulated sleep-wake cycles. Glutamate, which promotes neuron health and stress recovery. Norepinephrine, which is critical in regulating arousal, attention, cognitive function, stress reactions, and more. And gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, which reduces neuron excitability, and plays a major role in controlling anxiety, stress, and fear. A lack of volumes of these chemicals results in autism-distinct anxieties, which may include uncommon phobias like fear of specific sounds or social confusion, excessive worries related to a special interest, or sensory overload. Increased reactivity in the amygdala is usually paired with a reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is considered our natural regulatory circuit. The thalamus processes sensory information and emotions, helps with memory, planning, and learning, and plays a role in sleep, wakefulness, and consciousness. The thalamus is known as the relay station for your senses, except smell. And like a relay station, all information must pass through this section first before being routed to other areas of the brain for processing. Hyperconnectivity leads to all kinds of sensory issues, which are often associated with autism. The hippocampus is responsible for your ability to form new memories and is involved in spatial reasoning and social interaction. This region is often enlarged in autistics and has been associated with impaired learning, social emotional perception, and sensory hypersensitivity. An enlarged or asymmetrical hippocampus can impact the function of this brain region, resulting in social behavioral deficits, and may make it more difficult to make decisions based on past experiences because of its impact on declarative memory. In addition to the structures of the limbic system, we have the corpus callosum, which is a section of white matter connecting the two hemispheres of the brain. This section may be missing completely or in part in autistics. While not technically part of the limbic system, it is associated with cognitive impairments such as repetitive behaviors, intellectual delay, and deficits in attention, social interaction, and communication. Now let's discuss the secondary limbic system, which is also comprised of four main structures. The cingulate gyrus is involved in regulating emotions, behavior, and autonomic motor functions, such as heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, and endocrine hormone release. And that includes growth hormones, hormones related to regulation of gonads and sex organs, adrenal gland regulation, and cortisol, the stress hormone. The cingulate gyrus is also involved in chronic pain, depression, and spatial memory and navigation. This area of the brain is often thinner in autistics, resulting in lower activity related to its functions. Abnormalities in social interaction, communication, and restricted, repetitive, and stereotyped behavior patterns are attributed to this region. Our ability to eliminate cortisol is also hindered, leaving us stressed for longer periods. The ventral tegmental area is the reward center of the brain, where dopamine neurons involved in reward and motivation are located. Medical specialists have found that there is a difference in connectivity in this region for autistics, resulting in fewer pleasurable experiences in response to human voice processing, impacting language and social skills. It also impacts motion perception and attention engagement. The prefrontal cortex is part of the frontal lobe, which is involved in decision-making, problem-solving, and social behavior, but it is closely tied to the secondary limbic system. In autistics, this region shows a reduced ability to synthesize serotonin, which acts as a chemical messenger. This region in autistics has also been shown to have an absence of N-acetylaspartate, or NAA, which promotes the health and integrity of neurons. When NAA is abundant, it can replenish glutamate, which is important for the survival of brain cells and nerve cells. It's essentially how we recover from stress. However, autistics have a shortage of NAA, which limits our ability to recover from stress. The basal ganglia is involved in controlling movement and inhibition, hand-eye coordination, learning and decision-making, and processing emotions, language, and senses. In autistics, the balance is disturbed, impacting how this region works. There's some disagreement as to whether the cerebellum is part of the limbic system or not, even though it is connected to the hippocampus, amygdala, and cingulate gyrus. I'm including it here for simplicity. In addition to the secondary limbic system, the cerebellum controls voluntary movements, balance, posture, and muscle tone. Research suggests the cerebellum may be related to emotional processing, dopamine release, and GABA conversion from glutamate, all of which hinders our ability to recover from stress. If we look at the brain from underneath, we have better access to the next region I'd like to discuss. These are the temporal lobes, which are heavily involved in language processing, memory formation, and sensory integration. These lobes are often asymmetrical in autistics, which can have a huge impact on our ability to process language. And these are the occipital lobes, which process visual information. Autistics tend to respond differently to visual stimuli, or experience difficulties interpreting what we see, leading to visual fixation or visual disengagement. In turn, this can impact social interaction, which often requires eye contact and other visual engagement. These segments running down the middle of the temporal and occipital lobes are the fusiform gyrus. The fusiform gyrus is consistently active when people view faces. However, studies show autistics have less activation in this region than neurotypicals, making it difficult to process facial information and identify emotions in others. The fusiform gyrus is also responsible for auditory processing, including processing sounds, frequencies, amplitude changes, word recognition, and language comprehension. It also plays a role in short-term auditory memory, social perception, and vestibular or balance sensations. Returning to the side view, I'm going to quickly run through the remaining brain region, the parietal lobe. This region of the brain plays a crucial role in sensory perception, spatial awareness, and attention. Autistics often exhibit atypical development and connectivity in this region, which can lead to difficulties in processing sensory information, coordinating movements, and understanding spatial relationships. This can also lead to deficits in understanding social gestures, further hindering our ability to communicate effectively. It can also impact our ability to learn in theoretical ways, requiring more hands-on practice when learning. While these brain differences are biological, brain development is also impacted by environmental factors. It makes a difference when a child has an interactive parent or caregiver, as opposed to a neglectful one. It makes a difference when a child is encouraged to pursue their interests, as opposed to being shamed about them. So it's not only a matter of biology, though that does account for the bulk of autistic development. But we can't ignore the environmental factors, which can worsen our experiences. For instance, hearing issues can be worsened in a crowded room with lots of activities going on. Our mood can plummet when we are tired or under stress. So it's important to take steps that promote good mental health if we expect to regulate our nervous systems. Support from family, friends, and other people around us can make all the difference in the world. There are many strategies to help prevent overstimulation before it starts, such as wearing sunglasses or ear protectors whenever you go out in public. Or try bringing a stim toy to take your mind off of other stimuli that may be clogging your circuits. If you still find yourself in a stressful situation, the best strategy is to address environmental issues first, such as dimming the lights, turning down sound-making devices, or just completely moving to a safe space where you can relax and process your experiences. Short of all of that, here are 5 strategies to help regulate yourself in these situations. Strategy 1. Stimulate the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the human body. It runs from the brain all the way down both sides of your body and ends in your large intestine. This nerve controls 75% of your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of your nervous system responsible for helping your body to relax and conserve energy. So this nerve has been known to help regulate the body through practices such as deep breathing and meditation, or even simply just smiling. It tells your brain, oh, I must be happy now, and it stimulates that nerve. So stimulating this nerve can even calm down stomach issues and help with your heart rate. Tip number 2, seek counseling or simply talk to someone that you trust who can listen to your problems. After all, a problem well stated is half solved, as the saying goes. But sometimes all you need is just to get it off of your chest and out of your system. And this can be a challenge sometimes if the person that you're speaking to is unsure about their role and whether they need to help you solve your problem or not. So if that's not what you're looking for, be sure to let them know ahead of time so that they don't dysregulate you further. Step 3, sleep. This is a biggie. Sometimes all it takes is a day or two of complete rest, which often requires several hours of sleep. You'll have to learn to listen to your body and not fight those sensations to try and stay awake, because sometimes after a stressful event, you just need to take it easy and let your mind heal itself. Sleep is one of the best ways to do that. 4. If you're dealing with depression, anxiety, or PTSD, you may benefit from cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. As autistics, we may not be fully aware of the sensations in our body, and cognitive behavioral therapy can help you to learn to be more mindful of those signals, and then you can meet those needs more properly. This may entail journaling, relaxation, and exercise. Um, Several different treatments are available, but they should be tailored to what works for you. Not everything is going to work for everyone the same. If this is something that you're interested in, reach out to a healthcare provider or a mental health provider for references, and there may be even classes for you to learn some of this in your area. And tip number 5, if all else fails, there are medications that can be prescribed to deal with more chronic illness issues. Um, just remember that medication produces a range of effects. Some are the desired effect, while others are considered side effects or adverse effects if they're bad. Learning to listen to your body and how it responds to medications is going to be key in deciding if they're right for you or not. And there's no shame in taking medication. I myself regularly take medication for both depression and anxiety, among other issues. But I had to try several different medications before I found the right mix that worked for me. So please work closely with your healthcare professional about the options that might be right for you, and be open and honest with them so that they can make adjustments that will actually help. I hope you learned something from this video. The biggest takeaways should be that autism is a complex condition, And while that complexity is the result of many differences in the brain, our environment also has an impact. While it is important to only focus on things we can control, it's no secret that other people have a huge impact on autistic mental health and well-being. So while I can't control you, if you are not autistic, please control yourself. If you have an autistic person in your life, make an effort to understand how you can help support that autistic person. We are all different, but all autistic individuals have biological differences that make life in this modern world difficult for us. That's why autism is considered a disability. And it's not something that we can overcome, so please just try not to make things worse for us. What might be a minor irritant to you could be excruciating for us. And when we voice that, please take us seriously. It's not okay to shame anyone for a disability. To do so would be like shaming them for their gender or the color of their skin. It's just not okay. It's not something we can control. It's not bad or weird or dangerous, and it doesn't make us less. But we do require some level of support, and that support often is your cooperation. I hope this video helped to provide some perspective and understanding behind some of the mechanisms of autism. Overall, I hope it has inspired us all to look a little deeper and to be a bit more compassionate to one another. I'm David, and I'm a late diagnosed autistic adult. Until next time, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please comment, like, and subscribe to see more content like this, or click on the video here to continue watching.